Jon becomes king, Cersei becomes queen, and Dany leaves Meereen. Tonight we're discussing Game of Thrones episode 610, The Winds of Winter, on What's on the Box? Hi, I'm James.
I'm James.
I'm Chelsea.
And this is What's on the Box, where we discuss the latest episode of your favorite TV show.
This week was an explosive season finale, and I apologize for that intro to this episode.
Why not start with that amazing opening sequence that all took place in King's Landing? I think I clocked about 22 minutes before we moved on to a different location.
I'm glad we started with that right away because it was an event that all of us could see coming. We knew Cersei was going to burn down the Sept, but it happened in a way that we were all really disturbed by. It was really unexpected, and it all turned out differently than we thought.
Well, the body count aside, I think that the thing for me that really stood out was the artistry of it. The actual filmmaking that presented us with that story was so spectacularly beautiful and haunting and unsettling in a way that I never would have expected from Game of Thrones. It was the peak artistic achievement of this show, and it created a sense of dread and foreboding that trumped the fact that we knew that the Sept was going to burn down.
Yeah, as soon as the episode started and it was quiet except for the ringing bells, and it was a montage of people getting dressed, I was like, okay, this is a little something different, I'm enjoying it, and then that score kicks in as they enter the Sept, and I knew that we were in for a real good treat. And then the scene kind of takes a break to go to Loras' trial. That was a cool intro to the episode, but then it picks back up to show that no, that was just the beginning of this sequence, and it's gonna get a lot crazier.
There's never really been piano in the Game of Thrones score. This was kind of an anomaly. And I think it made everything feel really eerie and off, and something felt strange as soon as the episode started. So I think it kind of put us in Marjorie's shoes a little bit because she feels, obviously, that there's something off too.
The way that the score hits the same kind of few notes over again and then just repeats, it just creeped me out, like in a way that this score never really has before. The Game of Thrones score has always been very kind of epic and almost sentimental in a way. This is really using the score in a way that I'm struggling to remember the show ever doing before. And I think that coupled with the repetitive shots of people getting ready and this very slow burn that gets us to Loras' trial, and then the time that we take with Loras' trial really throws us kind of off the scent a little bit.
It definitely does, because, you know, in retrospect, Loras' trial doesn't matter at all. In the moment, it's a big deal that he's renouncing his title, his claim to Highgarden, and we see Mace reacting appropriately, and then the gruesome scarring of his forehead, just like we saw Lancel undergo a few seasons ago. And in the end, none of that matters. That was such a good way to make it surprising, even though, like you said, we kind of knew it was happening.
And we've kind of been emphasizing too that as the show winds down, that it's really about all these major houses drawing to a close and ceasing to exist. But I wasn't expecting the Tyrells to go out that fast.
This has hit me more than any other episode, and I'm going to include the Red Wedding in that. I think that's a personal thing. I wasn't as invested in the show when the Red Wedding took place, and it's obviously a huge moment, but for Marjorie to go out like that when she was arguably one of the kindest characters in King's Landing, at least. She was ambitious, yes, but she always cared for the small folk down to her last minute. She realized something was wrong and could have gotten out of there and saved herself, maybe, but instead she tries to get everyone out of there. True to the first time we saw her in King's Landing. We knew a bunch of people were gonna die, and I was fine with everyone else going out, but I'm not okay with losing Marjorie and losing Natalie Dormer, and I still feel affected by that.
Yeah, I think that was the most disturbed by the show maybe I've ever been, because I had the Red Wedding spoiled. This was probably the biggest shock for me that I've experienced so far, and I still feel really weird and kind of gross thinking about it because it was so disturbing.
Just the terror in her eyes as she realizes that something's wrong, and just the helplessness of it all. To watch the High Sparrow just incinerate like that and know all of those people's dreams and hopes just evaporated instantly. It really sits weird in me.
But I think the way that they shoot her final moments where she's looking up at Mason, there's more pathos going on here than just characters that we like getting killed. This is Robb saying mother at the Red Wedding. This is a moment like that really humanizes these people beyond just fantasy characters.
I like that her final moment is clutching Loras in sibling love, and that stands in contrast to the love that Jaime and Cersei have, which is more vain, more lustful almost. And you could argue that it's true love, but by the end of this episode, I think it's safe to say that it's gone. We lost Marjorie Marjorie, Mace, Loras, the High Sparrow, Kevin, all in one fell swoop. Then there was Pycelle too, and I've been trying to figure out why they didn't just let Pycelle go to the Sept and be incinerated along with everyone else. And the thing I've come up with is they just needed to make sure that he died. Pycelle's a slow guy, maybe he wouldn't have made it there in time, and they need to make sure that Pycelle dies because he knows about the wildfire. He's been standing in opposition to Cersei and especially Qyburn for a few seasons now. And I think that if they want to move on with his new regime, he has to go for sure.
I think it was more sadistic than that. At first I thought maybe it was kind of a bone that Cersei threw to Qyburn, but after watching it again, I don't think that's the case. I think Qyburn does have some kind of weird respect for Pycelle. I think this was Cersei knowing the worst way for Pycelle to die, which was at Qyburn's hand, because Pycelle hates Qyburn.
So you think Cersei was like, I want Pycelle to suffer, Qyburn, make this happen?
Yes, I do. It was just another instance of Cersei's cruelty on display, another repetitive act that we get later with Unella. I think all of our ears perked up a little bit when we saw that Unella was absent from the Sept, and then to cut to that scene of Cersei wineboarding her and really fucking with her head was pretty disturbing.
Those scenes where Cersei is imprisoned by the Faith and Unella's taunting her, I hated Septa Unella. I would say most people did. I don't think anyone's a huge Septa Unella fan. When Cersei says, my face will be the last thing you see before you die, a lot of us were like, oh cool, yeah. But then to see it happen, that was so fucked up. It's something, again, I love about this series is when you do get those moments of revenge and a moment that should feel good, it never feels great.
To the point of expecting it, but then when it happens, it's horrible. I think that's how I feel about the whole Sept blowing up thing.
Yeah.
We knew it was gonna happen, but actually seeing it happen makes me feel ugh.
And now that I've thought about this scene more, I do think there was implied sexual torture. Beyond that, this is a character trait that Gregor Clegane is known for already. I think that this is another instance of Cersei trying to exert power like a man. I think she is displaying sexual dominance as a weird power thing. And it makes perfect sense for Cersei to want to do that to this woman specifically.
Especially considering that she's dressing like Tywin by the end of the episode. These are all tools that Tywin would easily use in war. Show characters and book characters often diverge and have differences. And I think that Cersei is one of those characters who in the show is a lot more sympathetic so far. In the book, she's very paranoid. She does a lot more heinous acts. And in the show, you have Lena Headey portraying her, which does a lot to add to her sympathy. But I think that this episode finally made her for sure an evil, bad person. I know plenty of people have hated her before, but I've always kind of rooted for her. But now I want Cersei to go. She's still one of my favorite characters because she's fascinating. But I don't think anyone should forgive what she's done in this episode. The number of innocent people she's killed.
This is classic book Cersei. It's all short-term thinking. She's overestimating her own skills. She's kind of using up all of her tricks at once. She has all this power now. She has the seat of power and she has no idea what to do with it.
Exactly, and she didn't think about the consequences of her power grab, which include Tommen killing himself.
That was a real turning point for me as to where Cersei's character went beyond sympathy and into just despicable, horrible, awful, no good, very bad queen. She doesn't react to Tommen's death the same way that she reacts to Joffrey's or even Mercilla's. I think that it's almost as if she accepted it as a byproduct of her victory. And part of that comes from the Maggie the Frog prophecy, sure. One of the things that really grounded Cersei for us as an audience was her love for her children.
That in your cheekbones.
So for her to just casually dismiss the death of her last remaining child and move on to her coronation so quickly, there's no coming back.
I almost wonder if part of it is relief that the prophecy she's lived with all her life has finally been fulfilled and she can quit looking over her shoulder for it.
Especially because I believe that she assumes that the younger, more beautiful queen was Margaery. So now that Margaery no longer exists in any form, she probably feels as though she's free to pursue her reign unencumbered. Little does she know,
Them ships be coming.
let's talk about Tommen. I want to talk about Tommen and the manner of his death briefly.
One, it was an amazing shot.
This is one of the visual ways that Miguel Sapochnik is supporting the greater theme of this kind of repetition and duality and almost pluralization of history in this episode. We get that long shot and we get two sets of twin pillars on each side. And Tommen's whole stump speech was the twin pillars of the faith and the crown will secure the safety of the realm. And both of those come to an end in this episode. And he dives out the window right between them.
Also, to your point of repetition, that shot happens earlier with Cersei. She's standing by the window and leaves, but obviously doesn't come back. They repeat that shot with Tommen. He comes back and throws himself out. And the sound design in that shot is fantastic. You hear his footsteps walk away, you hear them come back, and then there's just the slightest whoosh as he falls out the window.
And don't forget too that the speech about the faith and the crown being the twin pillars of the world, Cersei said that first. She was the first person in the series to say that when she goes to meet the High Sparrow in the streets.
Right.
That's her little speech that she gives to him, and then he co-opts it, and then Tommen co-opts it. I still love Cersei.
I know you do.
I love her because she's the worst.
The small folk of King's Landing didn't seem too thrilled with the coronation of their new queen. It's a very dark setting, very ominous. Nobody looks happy.
The small folk have never, ever liked Cersei. That's been made so apparent throughout the series, especially when Marjorie shows up, and everyone loves Marjorie. But Cersei doesn't care. Cersei doesn't see the small folk as people. They're just pawns to her. She's still gonna consider herself queen even if there aren't any small folk to rule in the end.
It really sets the stage for a Hearts and Minds campaign by Dany, too. If she brings in Kinvara and her priestesses to kind of preach the gospel that is Daenerys Targaryen, I think we're going to see a big shift of support away from the establishment and to Dany.
Especially since the small folk were really embracing the faith. When Tommen announced the Crown's partnership with the faith, people were pretty happy.
Do we think that Jaime will be the end of Cersei?
I'm kind of leaning away from that now because it's a thing where maybe it's obvious now and we're gonna get some kind of different play on it than we're expecting. I don't know.
He looked pretty pissed. I think that one look from Nikolai Coster-Waldau just showed that he was done with Cersei. Before Jaime gets to King's Landing, he's at the Twins with Walder Frey and they're celebrating the Frey's newly won castle of Riverrun.
One of the best cuts of the episode.
Full house, Lannister.
What I really like about the scene is how much it shows Jaime has changed. It's obviously something we've commented on a lot throughout this season. What stood out to me was the fact that Bronn makes a joke about how these girls aren't blonde enough for Jaime. And he gives Bronn a look, but you know, he moves past it. And then when he's talking to Walder Frey and showing more respect to his enemy, the Blackfish, than Walder because he hasn't fought, Walder kind of cuts back with the only battle I remember you from is the Whispering Woods where you lost. And Jaime kind of shrugs that off too. He doesn't care about his military loss being brought up. The thing that sets Jaime off is when Walder Frey compares himself to Jaime and calls them both Kingslayers. I think that's important that it shows that he doesn't want to be like that. And so when he gets back to King's Landing, I think he's going to have to think about himself and his relationship with Cersei.
And there's such an easy parallel to draw between Walder and Cersei. They're all about just means to an end, and I think it's really poignant that the last person Jaime talks to before he sees Cersei is Walder.
Walder even says the whole purpose of war is defeating your enemies and that any kind of defeat is a victory. And I think his point is proven to be wrong when he's killed because of the manner in which he achieved his victory. I think that's foreshadowing what's going to happen to Cersei. Yeah, she has temporary victory by defeating her enemies, but the manner in which she did it is so abhorrent that she's going to come down because of it.
Both of them too are total sneaks that go about defeating their enemies in other places that aren't the battlefield. They defeat their enemies in places of safety. You know, obviously Walder organized the Red Wedding and Cersei just murdered a bunch of people in church.
Jaime does have a code of honor, and I think it's something that his journey through the Riverlands really restarted in him, particularly with Brienne. It's the insult to that honor that really upsets him. It's not so much you didn't win in single combat, it's that you duped people into feeling, like you said, that they were safe. Walder and Cersei have very selfish, personal motivations. Jaime's were selfless, and he never gets any credit for that.
But like we said, ultimately Frey's dishonorable victory led to his downfall because Arya came back in such a strong way. Wow, she's in Westeros again. That's cool.
Yeah.
Yeah.
This is something I saw online about how the three orchestrators of the Red Wedding die in the same way that Robb and Catelyn die. During the Red Wedding, Robb gets shot by arrows, then stabbed in the gut, and then Catelyn's throat gets slit. Well, we saw Tywin shot by arrows, and then this season we saw Roose get stabbed in the gut.
Poisoned by our enemies.
So it's only fitting that Walder gets his throat slit by Arya.
And before that, Frey pies.
Frey pies.
So Arya's act of vengeance here is a direct callback to the story of the rat cook that Bran tells Mira back in season 3. The gist of that story is that there's a cook who kills a prince and serves the prince in a pie to the king, and the gods curse the cook to live out the rest of his days as a giant white rat who can only eat his own young to stay alive. And he's punished not because he murdered a prince, but because he broke guest right. And so the Frey pies, the pies made of Walder Frey's sons, is a direct callback to that.
I've seen some criticism about Arya being able to change faces. I don't get that criticism. She
I don't
learned how to
understand
do
She learned
it.
how to do it.
Yeah.
She basically just audited classes at the house of Black and White and didn't get a degree. I'd like to give it up to the actress that plays the girl that Arya is. Like, as you were talking about that, it was hard for me to remember that that's not actually Maisie Williams wearing someone else's face. That's a girl doing a really good job as Arya as someone else.
What do we think is in Arya's future? All I know is that she's gonna run into Mel at some point.
We will meet again.
There's a couple reunions I hope to see as Arya's tromping through the Riverlands. One is with Mel, another is potentially with Sandor, and the third is with Nymeria.
Oh, please give us Nymeria. They've taken away so many wolves. They didn't even show us Ghost at all this or the last episode.
We haven't seen Ghost since The Wall.
Maybe John forgot him there.
I really hope not.
Maybe Ed was like, we've gotten really close while you were dead. In an episode with tons of major plot developments and huge character deaths, we also had Sam.
I saw a lot of people complaining that we spent time on Sam and Gilly, but guys, I love Sam and Gilly. It's nice levity, and I promise this all will have a point. It's very important that they're heading to Old Town. It's important that they're going to the Citadel because we're gonna learn some important shit there.
We see immediately when Sam enters that huge library that the Citadel is a place of advanced science. And I think that's going to be a very important conflict going forward as we see more and more magical things happen. But there's a kind of renewed sense in the people of Westeros and Essos wanting something beyond themselves, which is why religion, I think, has become such a bigger part of the plot. That doesn't exist at the Citadel. And we get that with the scene with the Maester that Sam interacts with when he first comes in. We see that in the astrolabe mirror system that lights the library. This is a place where magic has no power.
I really hope the Maesters take a larger role because we've seen them here and there at different castles. We've seen very different people be Maesters, from Luwin, who is one of my favorite side characters, to Pycelle, who's by all accounts pretty despicable. But as an organization, I don't think we've gotten a good sense of who they are. And I think that the clerk that Sam runs into is a good introduction to them as a group because I think it shows the arrogance. Maesters have always talked down about the higher powers and magic in the world. Even Luwin did it back when he would talk to Bran about such things. But obviously they're wrong about that stuff. There are dragons in the world, there are White Walkers in the world, and I really want that blind spot to become a larger factor in this. Hopefully we get a big character coming up in the form of the Archmaester that clerk references.
I'm also just excited to be in the world of the Maesters because the Maesters up to this point are always kind of a weird other. Like, they're kind of there, they're never part of anyone's family, they're just doddering old guys that no one ever takes very seriously, but it's cool to just be in their world now, and I'm really excited for that because if I lived in Westeros, I would so want to be a Maester even though I couldn't because I have a vagina.
No women or children.
And maybe we had two hints about the Maester's rising importance in the story. One, we have the White Ravens flying out, and that's a signal to all houses everywhere that winter has come. And two, there were a few instances in this episode where religion was denounced. Marjorie in the Sept says, forget your gods, we have a problem on our hands. And later, Sansa tells Littlefinger that she gave up praying long ago. Maybe that's a subtle way of signaling that, hey, there's this group who's going to be in the story next season who hates religion, hates higher powers, and they're going to be a factor.
You also have the denouncement of Melisandre by Jon.
That's right, because he's only there because of what she says is the Lord of Light bringing him back, but that doesn't stop him from wanting to carry out justice. He doesn't feel as though he owes the Lord of Light or Melisandre anything, except maybe a touch of mercy letting her go instead of straight up executing her.
I also definitely almost teared up at Sam tearing up at books.
It's like a victory that doesn't involve killing people.
Books!
We saw the White Ravens fly out of the High Tower, and we follow one all the way up to Winterfell. Winter is here.
What a great scene between Sansa and Jon up in those battlements.
I thought it was really touching too that when they realize winter's here, instead of a moment of dread, there's almost a moment of comfort, like their house words have come to fruition and they're home, and I thought it was really beautiful.
The rest of the country is terribly worried about it. The Maesters say it's going to be the worst in 1,000 years, but Sansa and Jon laugh. Ned always promised.
That comes as they're watching Mel retreat south because they just had that huge confrontation scene between Davos and Mel. That stuff finally paid off, and wow, Liam Cunningham.
Oh my
What
God.
a fantastic performance. I mean, obviously the whole cast is great, but he looked so drunk with rage. He was like unsteady on his feet. It was amazing to watch. And Mel actually getting something to do too instead of just saying foreboding words. I mean, she's She's been kind of broken this whole season, but this was the most active we've seen her.
I think this was one of Carice Van Houten's best scenes.
I think it was so tragic too that she was just discussing with John about how lucky he was to have a family. He was so fortunate to be able to sit in the back of the hall during a feast, and here she is getting kicked out of this family that she's had for a little bit. Like every semblance of family that she tries to have, like she's just always kind of left to roam around on her own, and I think it's kind of sad.
Which makes me wonder if she's going to find that with the Brotherhood Without Banners. If she's going to be embraced by Thoros and Beric and their band, and potentially maybe Arya as well.
Yeah, because she's heading south, they're heading north. Hopefully they meet up. And I figured that Mel would escape the episode unscathed because I do believe she has more work to do in the wars to come. But I'm glad that the confrontation between Davos and Mel played out as it did, with Jon being very Ned-like in sentencing this woman who brought him back from the dead to death for her crimes.
It was a very Stannis move too, in a way. I think that that's something that Davos responded to, because Davos didn't say, I want to kill you, Melisandre. He said, I ask your permission to execute this woman for murder. He never says the word kill. Even when Melisandre leaves and confronts Davos on her way out, he says, if you ever come north again, I will execute you myself. He's making this clear delineation between a justifiable act of justice and the murder that Melisandre committed.
And I think also that there's a delineation between Jon on one side and Ned and Stannis on the others. I don't think Ned or Stannis would let Mel go, but I think that Jon has enough sense to see that she might be of use later and that it might be good to offer her that small moment of mercy.
That was kind of a Ned move though, because remember in season 1, Ned lets Cersei go. He says, leave and I won't kill you. And Jon does that exact same thing with Melisandre. Granted, I don't think it's gonna turn back on Jon quite the same way.
That's interesting though, because there's so much in this episode that calls back to prior decisions that characters made, so I'm worried now that you make that point about what that's going to mean for Jon going forward and how his relationship with Melisandre might change. We've been waiting for the other shoe to drop on Shireen for a long time. It paid off. That was heartbreaking to see Davos deal with that, and a lot of that was Liam Cunningham's amazing performance in that scene. The distance between them I think was really great for it to take place in this empty Great Hall, just the three of them.
I love too that now that Sansa and Jon are back in Winterfell, Sansa's hair is styled like it was in season 1, and she looked really young to me in this scene. I feel like the past 2 seasons they've made her up a little more. She's looked a lot older, especially when scenes when she's with Littlefinger, they make her really look older. But this scene, she looked so young, and I think it was definitely on purpose. She's back at home, back at Winterfell, and she was even surprised and taken aback by the fact that she's getting her parents' bedroom. I bet it feels really wrong to her.
I love the way that they talk about trust, the way that they have this very familial moment.
And the way that shot with them being separated by that battlement while their walls are still up.
I really love the way that Miguel Sapochnik slowly moved his camera in away from the battlements. As the conversation progressed, we get those overshots where the castle actually is in the frame, dirtying up the frame a little bit, and as they converse, we move in so that it clears up, and we get them talking to each other straight on until ultimately they have that moment where Jon kisses her on the forehead. All the Jonsa shippers went nuts, I'm sure.
So in that moment, they decide to form a bond of trust, and it's immediately questioned in Sansa's scene with Littlefinger in the Godswood.
I loved the way that that was another kind of repetitive scene going back all the way to the pilot, with Ned in front of the heart tree and Catelyn coming in. In that scene with Ned and Catelyn, they talk about how Catelyn doesn't feel comfortable in the Godswood. She's this other who grew up in the Riverlands coming into a very northern place. And this scene with Sansa and Littlefinger is heightened in that same sense of alienation, because now it's Littlefinger. Littlefinger is someone who really doesn't belong. And where Ned excused Catelyn saying, you have 5 northern children, you're just as northern as I am, Sansa keeps Littlefinger at an arm's length, literally. And I think that that was a great parallel to draw between someone that we know Littlefinger is obsessed with, and now with trying to claim Sansa and keeping that parallel present.
It's also a repetition of the scene in the Vale when Littlefinger kisses Sansa. Back then when he does it, she doesn't really know how to react and he actually lands the kiss. But here, she's strong enough now and expects it so that she pushes him away. I really like that she's come that far.
It also reminded me of the scene with Ned and Cersei at the end of season 1. I think maybe there's some folly in revealing your grand plans to someone, and I don't know if that spells out good things for Littlefinger.
Yeah, Littlefinger really lays it all out there for her, and I think that that comes back in those final scenes in the King in the North scene when Sansa's looking at Littlefinger and knowing that he's already plotting against Jon.
Yeah, there's been a lot of speculation as to what those looks mean between Sansa and Littlefinger, and I'm pretty sure that it's very clear that Sansa is not at all on his side, but is instead terrified of what he's going to do to Jon, because Jon now stands in his way.
And I can't wait to see what he does.
All right, Mr. Littlefinger. What do you think of Littlefinger laying his plans bare to Sansa in the Godswood?
I think maybe it was a last-ditch effort to win her over as his bride-to-be and queen, and I think that Chelsea's right in that doing that might end up being a folly and lead to his death, maybe. You're right, laying out your plans for someone and then them not going along with that spells trouble for you.
I also wonder now, too, if Sansa's gonna stand in Littlefinger's way, and if Littlefinger ultimately wants to end up on the throne, will he resort to taking out Sansa? What's more important to him at this point, his Catelyn surrogate or having the ultimate seat of power? And I kind of think it's having the ultimate seat of power.
So you both think he was sincere. His goal was the Iron Throne?
I think show Littlefinger has the ultimate goal of the Iron Throne. It harkens back to that scene with him and Varys standing in front of the throne, talking about it. I think in the show, he's always wanted the throne.
And I think his Achilles heel is Sansa. I bet Littlefinger, too, is so self-absorbed that he feels like such a knight in this scenario. I think he really feels like he did come in and he saved the day and saved Sansa and really did her a solid. And I think that by laying all his plans bare like that, he really is trying to give her that fairy tale that he thinks that she wants and she did want at one point, but she's not that little girl anymore. He thinks by promising her a seat as his queen, that it's this beautiful romance, this song, that's what she's always wanted. So I do think he is being honest there, and I think he really thinks that that's gonna convince her to go along with everything.
But Littlefinger didn't take into account that Sansa would throw her support behind her brother.
As does the rest of the North in that amazing scene where they declare Jon the King in the North.
The King in the North. I loved it so much.
It's another direct repetition of the season 1 finale when Robb is declared King in the North.
Which also carries with it this huge ominous undertones of the terrible things that happened to Robb. Which sucks too, because like that was such a rousing, amazing scene the first time. And this time we get it not from Great Jon Umber, but from Lyanna Mormont, everybody's favorite new Northern lady. And we finally get the North Remembers speech. A variation on, but nonetheless, the North finally did remember. And for these grizzled war veteran Northern lords to be schooled by an 11-year-old was so fantastic. And I really think that each actor who played the Northern lords did such an amazing job in being so sincere and bringing such depth to those minor characters.
Guys, we got Wyman.
We
Yeah.
did it!
We knew it was gonna happen. I am glad though that while they really did trim what his story was in the books, they gave a lot of it to Arya and to Lyanna Mormont, and I'm okay with it.
I think it followed up on a theme that we've seen this season where the female characters were really taking their own power. And it's great to see that extended to a minor character like Lyanna.
Wyman in the books, is the one who serves the Frey pies.
Yeah, and also gives the whole North Remembers speech.
Exactly.
And yeah, another great performance by the actor playing the Glover. Like we said earlier, the points he made at Deepwood Mount were really good and made me side with him pretty much in not going over to help Jon and Sansa. But now he shows such contrition and sorrow for not joining them and a promise to follow them in the future. It was great to watch.
Yeah, his regret was real. That could easily have been just a blanket statement that gets us to the King of the North, but that was a very real moment for that character, and I love the way that Jon responded to it.
There's nothing to forgive, my lord.
He shows a humility that I think Robb almost lacked. Robb was very cold and brazen when he accepted his crown as King of the North. He felt that he had to put on this show of what the Lord of Winterfell was, and part of that comes from being raised to be Lord of Winterfell. Jon was never given that, so the fact that he earned it, I think he really feels that.
And I do think that the fact that Glover initially said no and that Wyman Manderly didn't show up until just now does give me a sense that Jon really earned it. I think it was actually better this way. Instead of them just upholding an oath that was made thousands of years ago by their ancestors, they followed logic and what would be best for their house in the moment. And now after Jon has proven himself, they're on his side. I think that makes their bond and fealty that much stronger. I do think Sansa reacted though when he was named King in the North, because Lyanna starts talking about the Starks and the Stark blood, and Sansa seems really happy with what she's saying. And then as soon as she specifies Jon Snow, Sansa's face kind of drops. There's definitely a change there, and I don't know if she feels as though she's not getting the credit she deserves, even though we saw Jon earlier explicitly give that to her. But the rest of the lords aren't, and I wonder if she has any kind of envy or jealousy over Jon.
She's disappointed, but Jon does the right thing and looks to Sansa Sansa before he accepts. And I think that that's something that kind of gets a little bit of a pass from Sansa. I'm sure she's not thrilled about it, but I think she understands the reasoning behind it.
And it echoes Robb looking at Catelyn when he was proclaimed King of the North, but I think Sansa's smile is a little bit more reassuring than Catelyn's was. The King of the North scene has one of the coolest transitions coming into it because it's a cut from the baby in the Tower of Joy to Jon's face with the music swelling. It's amazing. But yeah, we got Tower of Joy, we got confirmation of everyone's favorite theory that we all knew to be true. R plus L equals J. It was just almost a perfunctory scene. It was a scene that they had set up earlier in the season and that just needed to happen to have closure to that. I guess they didn't want to have that big reveal of Jon's heritage before the finale. I don't think anyone was super surprised by it, but it happened. We had to see it.
There are a couple details in that scene that I think are worth talking about beyond just the fact that it confirms R plus L equals J. One is Jon's name isn't Jon. That's a big deal. What is his actual name? Lyanna whispers it to Ned. We think it's Aemon Targaryen.
Some people think it's Aerys, that it sounded like Aerys, that there was an S sound in there.
The point is that he has a Targaryen name that nobody allegedly knows. Perhaps Helen Reed knows. Perhaps there's some secret in the crypts. We'll find out more next season. There's also that specific shot of Ned leaning the sword Dawn up against the bedpost, which I think is going to be important in some way. Whether that's we see Dawn in the crypts or something like that, or if it's just a further instance of the prophecy of being born under a bleeding star. And I think that that's something that we have to take into account, especially as Dany is coming to Westeros and her kind of legend is growing. There's more and more evidence building that Jon is the prince that was promised. He is Azor Ahai, not Dany. And if those two do become opposing forces, I think evidence like Dawn leaning up against the bedpost and obviously coming back to life are going to be big pros in the Jon is Azor Ahai column.
I literally just realized this second. By having Jon be born in Dorne, doesn't that mean that he was born underneath a bleeding star? Because the sigil of the Martells is the spear going through the sun.
I've never heard that before, but that's awesome.
Yeah, that's even more.
At the top of that flashback, we see Ned reacting in the same exact way that he did in the previous flashback, showing that although Bran can maybe influence the past, he doesn't change it. The way that Ned turned around and looked at that space was the way it always was. So that should strike down any theories that Bran can change the past.
The last thing I want to say about Tower of Joy is that I hope that next season we get more of Lyanna and Rhaegar's relationship so that we can have further empathy for the fact that Jon is their son. Right now, all the information that show watchers have is that Lyanna was kidnapped by Rhaegar and then she died in childbirth having Jon. We don't yet know what their relationship was like, and I think that's going to be a crucial detail going forward. Hope that we get more Bran flashbacks showing their relationship, potentially Night of the Laughing Tree. Tune into book club. It's going to be important to show that they had a loving relationship, not an antagonistic one.
I am a little curious about Benjen Coldhands because he leads Bran to the wall and is like, go ahead, I can't go past. But we already know that Bran is marked from when the Night King grabbed him in that vision, that mark relinquished the magical powers of that cave keeping them out. We think that if Bran moves south of the wall that the same thing will happen, that'll kill the magic keeping the White Walkers at bay from the wall. I kind of want Benjen to be Secret Agent Benjen, working for the Night King, because we've never seen him with the Children of the Forest, with the Three-Eyed Raven. He shows up after all that's done and says, yeah, I'm working for the Three-Eyed Raven, even though he seems more like a White Walker or a White. I think it would be dumb if he leads Bran to the wall not knowing that he has that mark and that he could bring down the wall, because he seems to know so much else. I would like him to have that knowledge and maybe be working for the Night King.
I don't think you're going to get that.
Well, I want it.
It does seem weird to me that Bran's mark didn't come up at all, while they were traipsing around in the woods. I feel like they would at least talk about it.
It could be one-time use.
What, the magic letting them into the cave?
Night King redeemed it for the wrong entrance.
Yeah, right.
But I don't know, if we were talking about the books, I would say yes, that something that complex would be possible, but we have 13 episodes of the show left. I don't think we're gonna get a scene with Benjen and the Night's King I made good on my deal. That's not gonna happen.
I guess the show has been showing that simplicity is usually the thing that wins out. In the case of Arya, really, I'm thinking of.
Yeah, you've been cut by Occam's razor before, James. Be careful here.
Okay, we've made it to Meereen, our last stop in this wonderful journey of what's on the box.
Do we even have to talk about Daario?
No.
I'm glad he's gone.
It was the weakest scene in this episode. It wasn't a bad scene, but everything else was just so good, I didn't care about it.
But the scene that follows it was one of the best scenes of the episode, I thought. In addition to Davos reacting to Shireen scene. This was the scene that got tears in my eyes when Dany produces the Hand of the Queen pin and pins it on Tyrion. That was so touching and so heartbreaking. Another parallel, another repetitive moment going back to the end of season 1. When Tywin says to Tyrion, "You're acting Hand of the King," it's an order to a subordinate, not an acceptance of someone whose counsel is valuable. For Dany to put that kind of value on Tyrion, and for Tyrion to be accepted for what he is and what he can offer, it was such a touching moment.
There's a lot of that in this episode, I'm realizing. Just characters finally getting to that point that they've wanted to be in. For the whole run of this series, Tyrion gets to actually be Hand of the Queen. Cersei gets to actually be queen, not Queen Regent, not Dowager Queen, she's the queen. Jon is the head of House Stark now, he's king in the north. They're all in these positions where they've wanted to be.
Yeah, it's a fulfillment episode. And I think that Dany's words to Tyrion are what make that scene so moving. I don't need your sword, I need your mind and your counsel. Tyrion has always compared himself to Jaime. Back in season 1, he says, "My brother is a great knight, all I have is my mind," and this is Dany saying, that's exactly what I want.
I love the way that scene is staged with Tyrion on the steps so that they can look each other in the eye, and that Tyrion has to make the choice to kneel to Dany, and it's not something that he feels he needs to do, it's something that he's compelled to do out of respect. I've seen some people say that Tyrion is in love with Dany. I don't think so. I don't think that's the case at all. I think he does care about her, but I don't think that there's any kind of romantic feelings between the two. They respect each other and they work together in a way that no other ruler, no other character ever worked with Tyrion. Dany and Tyrion as a united front, his intelligence and her charisma, I think is going to be so crucial to her success going forward, especially as they battle against Cersei.
Yeah, and in that scene, I like that Tyrion acted as an audience surrogate when he was like,
How about the fact that this is actually happening?
"It's actually happening, we're finally going to Westeros." It reminded me of earlier in the episode when we have Olenna and Dorne acting as the audience surrogate, being like, "Hey, Sand Snakes, shut the hell up for a minute, okay?" And I think that speaks to the episode's quality that the scene in Dorne wasn't awful, because you had Olenna mourning and you had Varys showing up just to say fire and blood, but I like that they excelled that storyline. You know, I really love in the books the movement and the politicking and all that and the machinations going on, but in the show, let's just get to it. That's why I don't mind how the episode ends with the fleet of Tyrells and Martells with Dany already. I don't need to see that back and forth. Let's just get to it already.
That was such a brilliant solution to the Sand Snakes problem too, is to put Olenna front and center in that storyline. That was so smart.
And if it's Olenna and Ilaria, that's fine, because remember Ilaria in season 4 when it was her and Oberyn, she was great. It wasn't until she got surrounded by the Sand Snakes that she became this horrible character.
I do still think that it was stupid to kill off Doran. I don't understand why that was a necessary story choice.
I don't see why it couldn't have been Olenna teaming up with Doran.
All right, so that's about it for the episode. How'd you guys feel about the season in general?
It was so great to see Game of Thrones rebound in such a strong way. I don't think you're gonna find any fan of book or show who's going to say that season 5 wasn't the worst season of the show. And for them to come back so strong, yeah, there were some issues, sure, here and there, but it's tough to get over the recency bias of these last couple episodes, which were unequivocally 2 of the best episodes in the show's run, if not the best.
I do think this latest episode was my favorite episode of the entire series, just because so many big things happened, but also it was so artistically done.
I just think it's amazing that when you look at the season finale compared to the season premiere,
You're a greedy bitch, you know that?
what a difference there is. The show has finally found its footing, where it was really shaky before in terms of steering away from the books and going into uncharted waters. I trust it a lot more now.
Yeah, I trust it as its own independent entity. That'll be it for us here in What's on the Box for this season. We are going to start a live stream book club premiering July 17th, where we'll read a certain number of pages every week and then meet to discuss it with the live stream. But please subscribe to our channel and tune in for more of that.
If you do not own a set of the books, please click the link in the description below. It's just an Amazon link, just buy it like you normally would, but we get a little bit of a kickback from it. No price difference, it's just normal, but it helps us out and helps us make the live streams and all of our other videos a lot better.
Yeah, it'll be this set, only yours won't be signed by Kit Harington. Thanks, Chelsea.
Yeah, I met him and took James's set of books with me, and he asked if I wanted my books signed. I said sure, and he asked if I wanted them signed to me, and I said yes, even though they were James's books.
To Chelsea, with love, Kit Harington. Thanks, Kit. But until all that, I'm James.
And I'm James.
And I'm Chelsea.
And this has been What's on the Box.
Now our watch is ended.
And now
Now
our watch has ended. Good morning, Westeros, and welcome
to Power Hour,
featuring Lord Baelish,
featuring the
and
Queen of
Regent.
the Seven Kingdoms, Cersei Lannister, and Littlefinger.
Today we'll be sampling some wines from the Seven Kingdoms, but first, news of the realm.
First up, there's going to be a walk at the Sept of Baelor. We're having a cake walk, and I've heard that the cakes are going to be sinfully delicious. Make sure you pre-register with one of the Septas.